Hi babies, it's Chloe from the ReiQueer.com and welcome back to the ReiQueer pod. As you can hear from my voice, I am a little bit sick today, but I needed to get this out for y'all and I'm happy to be here for episode 6. So today's episode is all about strength in surrendering and perfect victimhood. Now, if you haven't already, please check out all of our other episodes and our accompanying blog pieces. You can find them all on the ReiQueer.com. You can find them on YouTube. You could also find them on any podcast streaming site. All right, so let's dive right into the topic. Not gonna lie, this one is gonna be a little bit of a doozy in a good way though. We're gonna chat about the hard stuff, but we are brave enough to chat about the hard stuff. So come with me on this journey. But before we go on it, I do want to give a light content trigger warning because we are going to dip into subjects around and explicitly about abuse. So if that's not your vibe this time, no worries. We'll see you at the next one, okay? So I first want to start out by just getting a baseline conversation going around that word and that concept of surrendering. Not gonna lie, this one took me years to actually understand and really begin to implement in my life. And the reason being is because I have been through a lot of bullshit in my life, you guys. And something that happens when you're constantly being tried, you're constantly being taken advantage of, is that you build up this resentment, obviously towards the people that did that to you, but also towards the world. And you kind of have this vibe where it's like, I am not going to yield. I'm not going to lay down and you are not going to fuck with me. And so this concept of surrendering made no sense. For me, I thought that surrendering just meant that I was going to tolerate the bullshit. Surrendering meant that I was just giving up, that I was just laying it down, just letting anything happen. And that's just not really the case. The truth is that I was approaching surrendering in its original context, I think, which is that context of war. Because think about it. When you are in a battle with someone, if one person surrenders, what happens? You die. If you're in war, you're in battle and you surrender to the enemy, your life is over, honey. They're coming for you. And I feel like that is the context from which I was working with and that understanding that initially laid the foundations of what I thought was surrendering and why it just made no sense to me to begin with. So yeah, this concept of kind of just taking it just didn't work out for me. But I feel like now I have such a different understanding of surrendering. And I really honestly had to learn it the hard way. I hate that that was the case. I really wish it wasn't, but it's just the truth. So I feel like now my understanding of surrendering has more to do with acceptance. So it has less to do with defeat and more to do with acceptance and just really getting real with the isness of things, right? Is accepting that this is how it is for me right now. For me, that's step number one. If you're in a trying situation, if you're in a situation that is feeling like it really is breaking you, then first step, honestly, and I totally understand how it sounds counterproductive, but the first step is accepting the situation and not accepting it as in you think it's acceptable, not accepting it as if you think you deserve it or it should be happening or you're just giving up, but accepting as in you are just being real with the reality of your current situation, which is what I mean when I say you are accepting the isness of your current situation. So in this way, a big part of surrendering is really releasing the resistance to your current reality. I think when things are really painful, we tend to have these thoughts where we think, this shouldn't be like this. My life shouldn't be like this. This situation shouldn't be like this. And then that's where we start to build up that resistance where you're going against the actual facts of what's happening. And that resistance really sometimes keeps us stuck. This also has a lot to do with releasing false control. It's so complicated, y'all. I'm not even going to pretend that this is a topic that I can sit here and preach to you about. That's why I'm really trying to give a holistic, multi-layered view of it. And, we'll build out to this more as the episode goes on. But I do want to say that a big part of surrendering as well is accepting the isness of it, not resisting reality, but also releasing a false bit of control. So the ingredients of healthy surrender, so to speak, is accepting the isness of all things, is not resisting your current reality, and also releasing your false sense of control. Now, whatever situation that we may find ourselves in, I firmly believe that there will always be some factors that we have a big say in. We have some factors that we can control. However, there are also going to be factors that we can't. And it depends on where it is that we're focusing on that really sets us up, depending on the severity of the situation, to really be able to surrender in a way that can shift our reality or not. So in previous episodes on this podcast, I've shared a lot about my own personal struggles at a very, very low point in my life. So let's time travel a little bit back just to give you the full context of where I was coming from when I came to these understandings for myself. So picture it. I had just broken up with someone. I was in the worst breakup of my life. I was dogged out back to back, but this one, baby, this one almost took me out. Not gonna lie. I lost like 30 pounds. I was barely eating. My nervous system, it was a wreck. I was not okay. It was a really, really intense situation. So in that breakup though, I was also losing a family that I thought I would have forever, a family that I thought I was building all on my own. I also was recovering from the fact that that was a domestic violence situation. And so recovering from the abuse. I also simultaneously had been outed. And so I was dealing with the fact that my family knew I was queer. I was dealing with the fact that they wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. I was essentially disowned from almost everyone. I had to move. I was in a brand new living situation. I had to bring what I could. I left a bunch of my shit, a bunch of my childhood shit that hurts me to this day that I don't have. And I was at rock bottom. That's just it. I was completely at rock bottom and I thought, well, So the resistance that I was going through at the time was, why me? Why was this happening to me again? I just went through a terrible relationship. I was in this new one. I thought that this was my person. We had this family together. Everything that I thought I wanted, I thought I had, and that was just not the case. And so it was really hard to not resist my reality. It was really hard to not resist the fact that that just happened. And these thoughts of, why is this my life? This can't be my life. I hate my life. I wish I had another life. That was a constant for me. It also brought up things like, why are people hurting me like this back to back? Do I deserve this? Is there some invisible mark on me karmically that says I have to go through this? Is there a quality about me that makes me an easy target? Is there some part about me that deserves or wants this? It was a really dark time and all of these thoughts were coming through. Not only that, but at this point, I was the angriest I had ever been in my life. I was angry at the world. I was angry at my circumstance. I was angry, of course, at my exes. And honestly, I was the most angry at myself because how did I put myself in this situation? Why did I stay? And honestly, you guys, I'm not even gonna lie. At this point, what I wanted more than anything was revenge. I wanted them to hurt the way I heard it. Honestly, I wanted them to
No. In the sense that, no. You know what I mean?
That's just the truth. It was a really, really, really volatile headspace for me, one that I'm not used to being in. We're keeping that, but we can just beep it. But in hindsight, the reason why anger was so easy and full and overwhelming was because at the time it was the most easily accessible emotion to me. Underneath that anger was this awful well of sadness and despair and feeling like I f***ed my life up. It was all a symptom of a larger issue, which is that I felt like I had completely lost control of my life. So it was in this place, and I'm not gonna lie, it was a long time in this place. It was months and months and months in this place. And I always said degree by degree. So it didn't get better day by day. It got better degree by degree. These tiny little shifts that I could not even feel at the time. If you're on fire and your temperature is lowering degree by degree, you're not going to feel that shit, babe. And surrendering was truly my only option. And I'm not going to lie, this place that I was in, I was there for a long time. It was months and months and months and months. And I felt like slowly things were transforming for me, but it was degree by degree. It wasn't even day by day. It was degree by degree. It's a slow, agonizing process, but it's a process nonetheless and transformative nonetheless. So with my back against the wall, with my feet firmly at rock bottom, the only thing I could think of was, all right, so
no, I'm saying
what now? And two pathways became very, very clear to me. And I'm going to name these pathways now as succumbing or surrendering. And this is another way that I want to highlight the difference between the two. So one path, like I said, was succumbing. And succumbing to me would have looked like not being able to pull myself out of what was happening. Now, I want to say this. Some people, depending on what happened to them and where they're at in life and the resources they have available to them, succumbing is the only option. Succumbing may feel like the only option. You know, I can think of my own parents, for example. Succumbing was what they did. And when they succumbed, things changed for them radically. I want to say too that whether succumbing or surrendering is the path that you walk, both are massively transformative and both will change you post-traumatic event. Now, surrendering again, I think of that piece of radical acceptance, right? So if succumbing is, this is so painful that I feel like I have to go inside of that sorrow and become a part of that sorrow and fold that into me. And I feel like surrendering is more so, okay, this is what's happening. This is where I'm at. I am in so much pain. I am at rock bottom. I'm not going to resist my reality, but I do know that other realities are possible. And so the first step again in shifting that is that acceptance. So I think, both, I don't want to praise one over the other, because there are some people to whom succumbing really does feel like their only option. There are some people where succumbing might be their only option depending on what's happening. If I could give the analogy, it's sort of like the difference between going into the fire and becoming the ash and the difference between finding a way to dance in the flame. Both are incredibly painful, and honestly, both shouldn't be happening in the first place. These are all reactions to extreme situations. So there is so much grace with either pathway. As I mentioned before, though, both of these things will transform you. Both of these things will alchemize you. When Orion and I first met, the very first conversation that we had off camera, we met on his podcast, was about how when we had each gone through that situation of being completely disowned from our families and just having to hack it all by ourselves, that we saw those two pathways appear in front of us. But we knew that if we were to go the route of succumbing, that would change us in the way that it would harden us. That would change us in the way where it would be so difficult for us to access love and vulnerability again, versus allowing it to crack us open in that way and allowing the pain in a way that breaks us open so that we have more mobility. And even though both are terribly painful, one of these options leaves us open to the good things as well. But like I said, it's a very, very hard journey. So much love to you wherever you're on it. It was on this journey as well that I learned that getting over it was a very multi-layered thing. I think that in my experience, I have had the understanding come up over and over and over again that there are some things that will honestly hurt forever. And that doesn't mean that we're harping on the past. That doesn't mean that we have an inability to let it go. It's just the fucking truth. There are some things that will never feel better. There are some things that will always hurt us. And we can still live a full life grounded in the present with that understanding. So let's shift gears very slightly over to the concept of perfect victimhood and what that is. So if you've never heard of it, a perfect victim is essentially the concept of having a victim or someone who has gone through some sort of abuse or some sort of harrowing situation act in ways that make people want to support them. It's really up as a concept, but it's just the truth. And so we have to think about these things in the context of when someone is hurt, when someone is abused, who is actually believed from that situation and who it is that we offer our protection and who it is that we turn our back on, right? So there are some examples that I can give you that go against this concept of perfect victimhood. So reactive abuse, for example, which is so not a thing. Essentially, it's if you are in a situation where you're being abused and you finally hit back or you finally start doing the things that have been done to you or worse, then that ruins your image of perfect victimhood because it muddies the water just enough for people to say, oh, well, maybe it was the both of them. Another thing that goes against this concept of perfect victimhood is staying in unsafe situations when we, by all accounts, should have the mobility to leave. This is the category that I fell in. I technically could have left, but there were so many reasons that I felt like I couldn't and that I had to stay. And we'll get into that later. But, this is a category of an imperfect victim where people say, well, I don't feel sorry for her because she should have left the first time she was hit. Another example that goes against people's understanding of perfect victimhood are victims that act a mess, victims that aren't clean and sanitized and polished, that say terrible things, that act in ways that disturb people. You have to follow this invisible code of conduct to make people believe you and to appear in this pure light for people to give a that you were abused. And it's a really, really shitty situation, but it's one that happens all the time and we have to just name it and talk about it. The truth is, this concept of perfect victimhood and muddying the waters, so to speak, so that if you are in a situation where you snap back, then people don't believe you anymore. All of these things really point to a very uncomfortable truth, which is that most abusers are operating from a place of intense trauma. And the reason why abuse apologists sometimes feel like they can't make a decision or side with the victim in the situation is because they understand that concept of the fact that this is a person that is also in a lot of pain and chose to channel that pain in a way that looked like hurting other people. Now, obviously, I'm not excusing that, of course, but I'm just speaking to the fact that the abuse apologists that I know in my own situation were all reacting to the fact that they knew that there was some supreme trauma being handled or not handled by my abuser in question. In retrospect, the ways that I acted immediately after that relationship and the way that I tried to navigate my new life was really coded with the knowledge around perfect victimhood and honestly being absolutely terrified that no one would believe me, being absolutely terrified that people would choose my ex over me, and being scared, honestly, that I wouldn't be a perfect victim in people's eyes and therefore no one would care that I just spent 2 years of my life in the pit.
Oh my God.
Now, in my specific context, I did have a lot of, I don't want to use the word privilege, that doesn't feel quite right, but I will say in my context, there was no reactive abuse. I honestly kind of just took it and just cried about it. But, I think all the time, what if that's not where I was in life at that time? What if I had just snapped and hit them back one day? Or what if I just had enough and I did something even worse? I know for a fact that that would have compromised my ability to have so many people rally behind me and actually believe me and care about my situation. And I wish that weren't the truth, but it just is. And honestly, this is what some abusers rely on. Some of them actually have that tactic where they wind you up and 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 they do everything they can to bring you to that breaking point so that if and when you finally snap and react in a way that they want, they get to finally muddy the waters the way they want to, and they get to avoid accountability by saying, well, it looks like it's the both of us doing this now. I'm not the problem here. This is such bullshit, honestly, and it's kind of triggering because I remember at the very, very end of my last relationship, I'm so embarrassed to admit this, but I was still trying to make it work even after the final time that things got violent, even after I had already left the house, even after I'd already told my friends that, yes, I'm finally leaving this time, this is it, making all the plans. There was still a part of me that was willing to work with them. And so we were actually going to go to therapy. Thank God we had someone who had so much integrity as a therapist and was able to say, listen, if your issue is abuse, therapy is not going to solve that because couples therapy is not for abusive people in the sense where you don't go to couples therapy to work on one person's abuse. That person has to have their own relationship with their own type of therapy rather than folding that into it being a couple issue. And this was one of the things that definitely opened my eyes. But I remember in that intake call, my ex really sat there and said that the abuse went both ways. That was the final nail in the coffin.
I really think you ate and you're so humiliating. You're dumb.
For some reason, and honestly, I think again, this was just me preemptively reacting to this concept of the perfect victim. That was so not true that it spun me out. because I'm like, oh my God, they're going to go around and tell people that I was a participant in somehow abusing them, knowing for a fact I never raised my hand. And oh my God, it really took me out. But I put that example in here to say that that is a tactic that abusers will rely on. The fact that they know that the moment someone snaps and acts in a way that can be folded into their little narrative, that person loses that ability to be a perfect victim in people's eyes. And from that point on, they will have a harder time having people believe them. And sometimes, depending on the severity and the context of your situation, no one will believe you. And they'll say, well, it was just the both of you then, which to me is it's unbelievable. I think this concept of perfect victimhood does a lot of things, but it also opens up these questions for us to think of who deserves victimhood, who deserves our protection, and who deserves our belief. Obviously, we want to say that the answer is everyone, but that's just not the case. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to chat about the demonization of the word victim in itself. Now, I hear two primary thoughts when it comes to that type of thinking around the word victim. One, I actually oftentimes hear from survivors, which goes something to the effect of, I am not a victim, I'm a survivor, or I'm not a victim, I'm a blah, 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 insert the word here. Now, this could totally just be a finger pointing to the moon situation where it's just the word doesn't work for them, and honestly, totally okay. But I think honestly underneath it, this comes from a place of wanting to feel empowered after a situation when you felt your most vulnerable and taken advantage of. I think this also comes from a place of wanting to have that sense of belonging to yourself, not belonging to someone in the sense of being their victim. Even just saying that feels really icky. So I completely understand where that comes from. The other thing that I hear a lot when it comes to this demonization of the word victim usually comes from abusers, which is, oh, you're playing the victim. This is literally in the abuser's syllabus. It's in their onboarding package. It's in their one-on-one. This is classic textbook playing the victim by
little telltale rat. Okay. Anyway, you're a rodent.
I think that, and this is just me theorizing, I think that this comes from a place of really in their minds thinking of things in black and white, in the sense of there is a good guy and a bad guy in the situation. Now, I want to say that most abusers underneath it all are dealing with superhuman levels of shame. And so hearing or even feeling like they are being thought of as a bad guy is going to spin them out. Because at their core, they don't think that they are good, worthy people. Those of us who have been abused actually tend to think of things in the opposite. We don't think of things in that same good guy, bad guy, black or white category. And this is evidenced by the fact that we stay with them because we know they aren't these terrible, awful, disgusting people 100% of the time. We can actually see the person underneath the monster. And sometimes we love them. And because, again, they're dealing with this shame, because they're dealing with this self-hatred, they will never trust you because you love them. That doesn't make sense for them. And so love will never, ever be enough. As we wrap up our time together, I do want to leave you with some advice if there's anyone listening who is currently in a situation like this. The first thing I want to say is go where the love is. That is some of the most powerful advice I ever received, and I always share it at every chance I can get. There are people in this world, people that you may already even know, that have the bandwidth to support and love you as gently and as calmly and as thoroughly and as truthfully as you need them to. That love obviously must come from yourself, but if you're struggling with that, then you go where the love is, and that will reaffirm and bring out that love for yourself. And it reaffirms the fact that you are so deserving of it. My second piece of advice, which came straight from episode 2, Lessons in Heartbreak and True Love, is that, and I'll say it as many times as I need to, loving somebody, being in love with somebody is not a good enough excuse to withstand mistreatment. Ever, point blank, period. I know it's hard, babe, but you have to do it anyway. Every single relationship that I've had to leave for my own safety, I have fully left while still being completely, deeply, madly in love with that person. It was torture because you're dealing with the breakup and you're dealing with the fact that there is no difference between how much you loved this person in the relationship and out. And you have to go through that process of falling out of love by yourself. It's very, 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 very hard. And I understand why it takes people many attempts to do it. And I understand why some people don't. It's a very hard thing to do. It's a very, very hard thing to do. But I'm begging you, if this is your situation, do it anyway. The last piece of advice, and honestly, this is again one of my favorite pieces of advice to get and to give, is that the show is never over until it's over. You will always have the opportunity to change your life no matter what. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's probably going to be the hardest thing you'll ever have to do, if we're being honest. It's going to be really, really challenging. But as long as you are still alive, as long as there is still life to live, there is always time. And it's never, ever, ever too late. I'll tell you all a super quick story. So when I was in my abusive relationship, I remember there was this one night I just couldn't take it anymore. I left our apartment and I went downstairs and we had this sort of like rec room situation. And I was down there and I was on the couch and I was just journaling. At this point, I felt like it was so hard for me to continuously call my friends to talk to them because I wasn't leaving. So all I was doing was just offloading all this trauma on them and being like, okay, bye. And so a lot of times I turned to my journal and I remember specifically writing down, it's too late. I already ruined my own life. I felt so locked in. Oh my God. And, you know, if you can already tell, I'm not exposing certain details on purpose because I don't want that smoke. But let's just say our lives were extremely intertwined and it went beyond us. Like I said, we had family. And so I felt like there is no way I can leave. I am so in deep. It's nuts. At this point, I've chosen this person over my family, which not true, but that's just how I thought at the time. I thought it's too late. I am so in love with this person. I would lay on a sword for them right now. I would give them everything. I am giving them everything I have. There is no one else that I want to struggle with like this, but this person. It was a lot. The point is that I felt like it was too late. It was too late and I was stuck and I didn't know how to get unstuck. And it wasn't even a month later that I had a whole new life. And it all felt like it tumbled completely out of my control. But I knew that that was the universe showing me that no, bitch, it's not too late. You still have so much more life to live and this is not your purpose to be in this situation. All that to say, I love you. You got this.
Congratulations, bitch. Like, we've been through it. And you fucking made it, girl. You made it.
If you made it through the end of this podcast, thank you so much for listening. I know I was speaking directly a lot to folks who have had similar situations, but if you've never been in a situation like this and you're still listening, I really appreciate it. And you know what? I truly believe even if this isn't your specific situation, we unfortunately all know at least one person that has been touched by abuse in some way. And so having these conversations, thinking about things in this way really only helps us be better people to ourselves and to those around us. I hope we enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much as usual for doing some time traveling with me. If you'd like to read up on our accompanying blog piece, check out the link in our YouTube description. You could also just head over to ReiQueer.com/blog. Send us a like, subscribe to our channel, leave us a rating, leave us a comment, let us know how you're loving the pod. As usual, for all services, head over to ReiQueer.com. As always, shout out to my baby, Orion, at Orion Rice Productions for producing, editing, filming, and honestly putting up with all my diva antics. BTS, love you. Also, very exciting news. You might have seen this on our Instagram, but we are rolling out season 3 of Seminar Season, which essentially is a month of custom workshops done by yours truly. I'd love to have you there. Tickets are $20. It's virtual. I have 5 free tickets per workshop. You can find all the information on our Instagram, or you could head over to the events calendar on the ReiQueer.com. Just check the April calendar and you should see them all there. Until next time, everyone. Bye.